Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Steven Pynakker, and I'm very privileged and honored to have a return guest come onto my program. This is the third time that Dan McClellan, the biblical scholar who has now become a major influencer, if you will, in this space, not only in the Mormon scholarship space, but also in the biblical scholar space. And I actually was talking to a prominent scholar, and I asked them, I said, who should I bring on to respond to this latest discovery, this claim of gold plates found in Saudi Arabia that appears to kind of almost vindicate the Book of Mormon in the story of the plates there. And this person, the first person they recommended was you, Dan. And so I messaged you yesterday and you hopped on board. So first of all, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for doing this today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm flattered to hear that someone recommended me, and I'm happy to be here again. And it's good to see you again, Steve.
Yes, and so and you actually have some images that you want to share with the audience. You have some things you want to talk about. I guess before
Yeah.
we get there, Dan, I just wanted to say that of course, you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints,
Mhm.
and you're also a highly regarded biblical scholar. And I just wanted to ask you, like when you hear like rumblings or a story of ancient plates found or something, does that do you immediately put your skeptic's hat on, or do you also wear your believer's hat? I mean, how do you from what prism do you even view those claims when you first hear them?
I think initially there's always there's a part of me that just loves new discoveries, and so there's a part of me that wants things to be real. But I think that when I hear this, it depends on the context in which I hear it. If I hear archaeologists talking about, oh, in this dig, somebody came up with this, I'm likely to approach it a little less with a little less skepticism. But when it just pops out of nowhere on a YouTube show, immediately I'm very skeptical about it, and that usually overrules or overrides any kind of confessional desire or hope pretty quickly.
Okay. And that's understandable because as a little kid growing up, I would hear stories about Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat and maybe things like the Shroud of Turin and, objects, sacred objects that would be important to my faith. And then especially what's so fascinating, of course, that the very first time this was, well, actually, this talked about last year as well, but the first time this kind of got publicly, any public exposure was last week. This was revealed on the show called A Rude Awakening, Shabbat
Mm-hmm.
Live, which is a leading, very popular channel in the evangelical slash Christian Messianic world. And so here you have Latter-day Saints. And what was so funny is I was made aware of this right away because, of course, this is in my orbit, right? And it took
Mm-hmm.
about 5 or 6 days for it to get into the Latter-day Saint world because I was waiting. Like I went through the comments like,
Oh, really?
yeah, like it didn't immediately happen because I even when the video first came out, I looked in the comments and not a single person referenced Mormonism and the gold plates. So it gradually makes its way into the Latter-day Saint world. And I totally understand why, if you're a Latter-day Saint and you see evangelical Christians talking about 2,000-year-old gold plates, I mean, imagine how excited I imagine how they would feel. And so I told the Paul
Yeah.
brothers, who are good friends of mine, I said, if I was in your shoes, I probably would have done the same thing. I would have probably done an episode about it. So this is where we want to have science, we want to have scholarship, and we also have faith. And so we have the convergence of all these worlds. And of course, you can understand. I mean, I guess you can understand why a Latter-day Saint would be very excited about something like this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's not surprising at all. And there was a time before I had kind of developed a thicker academic lens that it would have been something that blew my hair back as well. I have no doubt about that.
So I just before we get started and you want to share with some images, I just want to ask you a question. Imagine that this exact object was found in a site
Mm-hmm.
and has a solid provenance. Would you give more credence to this discovery, as opposed, would you immediately write it off, or would you be much more open to the idea that this could be legit if it was found in the right context?
I if this was part of a controlled archaeological excavation and it was found in situ and the stratigraphy lined up and everything, I would give the benefit of the doubt to authenticity.
Okay.
And then I'd want to know what's the dating, what was it found with, what's the context, all of this kind of stuff, to try to establish some kind of sense of how these were produced, what they were used for, and then I'd want to see what the texts say. And that's a lot more rare when something exciting like that comes out of the ground. And it's far, and we had just last year, there was someone discovered a potsherd. Someone was walking in a place called Lachish in Israel, and found a potsherd and picked it up, and it had writing on it. And whenever I'm in Israel, like, there are potsherds everywhere when you're at an archaeological site, and I just can't help but kick them over and just kind of poke around, and it's the dream that you find some inscription or something like that. And somebody found something that said Darius on it, and this would have been the first ever discovery of an inscription referencing Darius. And this wasn't a controlled excavation, but it was at a site, and so they didn't have any reason to suspect that this was a forgery. And so this became huge news until somebody said, "Ooh, I actually am a teacher. I was on the site, and I was actually illustrating how to inscribe on a potsherd, and I wrote that and then accidentally left it there." So even you have to exercise some skepticism, even when it sounds like something that makes a lot more sense. But if we had the luxury of all of those things, and we could say, we know this came from this time period, we know this was produced by whatever group was living in this time period, and we found this pottery with it, or we found these other inscriptions with it, or we found human remains or something like that with it, it would be a whole different story, and I would be a lot more excited to be going on to podcasts to talk with people about it.
That's great. Well, thanks for giving us that context. So I'm just want to kind of hand this off to you. You said you had some images you want to share with my audience, and so
Yeah.
I'm able to screen share, and I'd like for you to share some of your thoughts and some of your observations.
Yeah, absolutely. Give me just 1 second, and I will start off with images that I pulled down from the YouTube video, so folks can see what we're dealing with. So you can see the fingers on this that give a sense for the size here. These are probably a little over an inch in height, maybe around an inch in length each page. You can see there, it's kind of embossed. It's imprinted on one side. The page on the right side is backwards because it is sticking out on the other side. So they're designed to be read facing in one direction. You can see some interesting imagery here. Right next to the thumb, you've got kind of and I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
You've got kind of a star burst image. You've got what look like grapevines kind of along the border, and it's a little easier to see here. And then you've got this, looks like wheat in the middle here. And I'm going to pull up another one. This is turning the page. So the right side is the back side of the page that we were just looking at. Okay. And here you've got a palm tree. You've got an inscription. You've got this border that is just kind of a symbolic border. And then you have this imagery that's supposed to look like temple pillars or something like that. And I think they intended for that to be the tetragrammaton, to say Adonai. Perhaps it's actually it looks like two yods in a row. So that doesn't work as that. Then we're turning the page again. We've got more imagery. This is a profile view of a face. Looks like they've got a beard. They've got a diadem on. We've got more inscriptions. We've got a menorah here. And then we're back to that. And then there are other things that were discovered with it. Again, you've got the grapevine border here. You've got the menorah inside of this border. And I think they said this was supposed, they say name of house of Yah, Shem, looks like name at the top there. this is supposed to be, I guess this is supposed to be, if we take this as a bet and that is a tav, then we're reading right to left on the top, and then we're reading left to right, coming down the left side. And then they want this to be ya. That is a backwards yod on the top up here. I don't see how they get a hey out of that. That looks more like an upside down shem. Or what did I say? Shem, shin, similar to what's going on up here. So this is just like the imagery here. And then there are a couple other images. We've got that same menorah. We've got a plate. It's a codex. It's got writing all over it. We've got starburst stuff on there.
And are these from the lead plates?
No, this is all the stuff that they shared on this video.
Oh, okay, got it, got it. I was
This
just
is
making sure.
this was
Okay.
all part of the same
Okay.
discovery. And the biggest problem with all of this, and then here we've got more writing. The biggest problem with all of this is you can occasionally make out a word, but these scripts are all a jumble of Old Hebrew, excuse me, Aramaic script,
So you say Old
Nabatean.
Hebrew, you're talking like Paleo Hebrew, right?
Yeah, so we usually use Paleo Hebrew to refer to people who are writing in a period when the Aramaic square script was in use, but they're trying to make it look old.
Okay.
We usually refer to inscriptions from like the pre-exilic period as just Old Hebrew.
Okay.
So this is a mixture of newer and older scripts. It is a mixture of Hebrew and non-Hebrew scripts. And then the way they're formed is inconsistent. Like the stroke orders are not always the same, which is an indication this is not someone who is trained in this language. This is not someone who knows this language. They're writing the same characters in different ways each time they write them,
Okay.
which is an indication this is something else is going on here. And so that's all fine and good, but I want to share images of the Jordan-led codices, which were publicized by a man named David Elkington back in April, May of 2011. And you're going to see some striking similarities.
Okay.
All right, so we will just pull that up. Okay, so similarly, we're dealing with bound lead books. You have the exact same style of letters, where you've got a mix of Nabatean and Old Hebrew and the square script, and it is inconsistent. You've got some things that are backwards. So, for instance, you probably can't see it very well. But you also have the same iconography. You've got these grapevine borders along the side. You've got a menorah here. The arms of the menorah are straight rather than curved. You've got a little starburst image here. And there are, find some other examples. So here we've got other menorah imagery. We've got, and they came out with upwards of 70 images of these plates, and the lettering is identical. It's, the orientations are mixed up, the stroke orders are mixed up, the combination of different scripts is mixed up. Here we have something that they highlighted in some of the other imageries. You've got pillars, temple pillars. You've got menorahs inside of borders. Same thing going on here. This is one of the same plates. And then
just so people understand, Dan, I guess what you want to put across here is that these lead plates, the consensus is that these are forgeries.
These are forgeries.
And so are you saying like this is proven 100% these are forgeries? Is there any scholars that give any credence to these at all?
There are a couple of, there's one scholar who was associated with the group that came out with the Jordan codices, Margaret Barker. A lot of Latter-day Saints know who Margaret Barker is, who was endorsing the authenticity of these things. I don't know where she stands today. But I don't think there are many scholars who would offer anything other than a flat rejection of the authenticity. And I'm going to show one of the reasons that we know
Please do.
beyond a shadow of a doubt that these are forgeries. And this image right here is the start of this. First, we have the same starburst symbols. We have the same stylistic borders here. We have the menorah with inscriptions around it. And we have this interesting, looks like a date palm. Now, these are some images in 2011 when the Jordan Lead codices first came out. Some friends of mine and I who are scholars, we put our heads together to say, how can we get the word out that these are forgeries? How can we demonstrate to the world that before things get too far? Because misinformation, the famous quote that I'm going to butcher is that a lie travels around the world before the truth can get out of bed or get its socks on or something like that.
Yeah.
And we just wanted to try to stem the tide of that to mitigate any kind of damage that this misinformation and these forgeries were going to do. But it started in 2011. I think it was like the last day of April, or maybe it was the last day of March. I don't remember. But this man named David Elkington published this press release, says, we discovered 70 golden tablets in Jordan, and they're first century, they're Christian, they're covered in these inscriptions. And one of the scholars said it means I will walk in perfection. And it's actually this inscription up at the top that a scholar who I have personally been in touch with, who said, please don't ever use my name because I don't want to be associated with these. I said, I guess if you wanted to force some kind of sense on this, you might squint at this and read it as I will walk in perfection. But he has since said, don't quote me on that. I don't want to ever hear about these things ever again. I don't think that that is actually what that says. And I've got blog posts where I talk about how it can't really mean that. But when that news first came out, somebody you and I both know, Daniel Peterson, shared on a message board an email that was making the rounds from a classicist at Oxford named Peter Thoneman. And when this news came out, Peter Thoneman shared with an email list a bunch of other of scholars saying, this person reached out to me a year ago with photographs of plates asking for me to authenticate them. And I was able to demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that at least one of the plates that was a part of that group was a modern forgery. And this is the plate that he was able to show was a modern forgery, although, let's see, I need to see the top of it. Okay, so I don't know how well you can see this, but you can see there's an inscription at the top.
Yes.
And this is Greek. Okay. And Peter was like, this doesn't make much sense. And it seems to be because whoever wrote this could not distinguish a Greek lambda from a Greek alpha, because in this particular script, they're actually pretty close. They're difficult to distinguish. And if you don't know the language, it's easier to mix them up. And he was actually able to track down the source of this inscription by replacing the misunderstood letters with the actual letters. He found out that this is an inscription, a funerary inscription from a that is on display in a museum in Amman, Jordan.
Okay.
And he also showed that this inscription begins in the middle of a word and ends in the middle of a word because somebody copied it down off of that funerary inscription, but didn't understand the language well enough to know where the word began and the word ended because they didn't put spaces in between the words. And so very clearly that is a modern forgery. But there are a couple other fascinating things as well. One is in the upper left-hand corner, you kind of got a view of what looks like somebody riding a chariot. And my friends and I, we were able to do some sleuthing and find the actual coin that was used to create this impression. This matches, the right side of this coin matches exactly the impression on that plate. But this is a modern fake coin.
Okay.
So this
and
is
how
not
do we
ancient.
how do we know that? How do we know that that's a fake coin?
Because this is something you can go online and buy. It's just a fake. And so when you I can't really do it now with on the screen, but if you superimpose the image on the right on this, it matches perfectly.
So the only question I would have, just so I want to push back a little, how is it
Uh-huh.
that maybe that coin could be a fake, but couldn't it have been based off of a copy of an actual ancient coin?
There's no example of an ancient coin that exactly matches this.
Okay.
This motif of the chariot rider is actually quite common, but they're always different. What the horses look like, what they're holding, what the wheel spokes look like, they're always different. And there is not a real ancient coin that matches this.
Okay.
But what's on that plate 100% matches this.
Got it. Okay.
And there's another example as well, and I don't think I have that is right here in the middle. You can see this head, and give me just 1 second to see if I have the other photo. I think
Well,
it
this is
might
very
be. This is another common motif from ancient coins. It's Alexander the Great wearing a lion headdress.
okay.
And again, you have numerous examples of this kind of coin, and they all differ in a bunch of ways. But there's only one that exactly matches what we have here in terms of all of the contours of Alexander the Great's face, all the contours of his hair, all the contours of this lion headdress. And the only one that matches it exactly is a modern fake coin.
Okay.
So again, we've got these impressions that are being made from modern fakes.
Okay.
And we tried to track down what rubber toy matched this alligator, because this is very clearly based on a modern alligator. We couldn't find anything that matched it exactly. I thought this profile on the left looked an awful lot like the buffalo head nickel face, but it doesn't match exactly. We weren't able to track down where that came from.
Okay.
But I want to point to this tree right here, because that other plate that we showed, which this one, this actually wasn't shared by David Elkington, but the people who were in possession of these plates, who were kind of letting David Elkington access them, actually reached out to me and sent me these photos. This tree right here on the bottom of this with the starburst shapes exactly matches in every single detail this tree right here with the starburst shapes. So whatever was used to create this impression on this demonstrably modern fake plate was used to create the same impression on this other plate, which is part of the collection that Elkington had, but this is not one of the images that Elkington released.
Can I just ask you a question, maybe that might be on the audience's mind? Is it possible that this could be a mix of genuine plates with fraudulent plates, and that maybe there are real plates there, but because they share the images with these fake plates, you lump them all in the same group? What if somebody wanted to push back and say that?
I would say two things. First, lots of things are possible. It's obviously possible that could have happened. However, that is not how forgers tend to work.
Okay.
If they have genuine stuff, they use the genuine stuff. It is not common that you find them multiplying fakes with the genuine stuff. And there are other things to point out about this plate. This plate here is also very clearly fake. This is not genuine. This doesn't spell anything.
Right.
These have the letters are wrong. And we've actually gone through and shown that the inscription on the left here is a combination of different like die. Somebody created a couple of lines of text and then like copied them. And this is impressed over and over and over again on these and many of the other plates. So possible, yes. Okay. Lots of things are possible. But this is something that I talk about when it comes to apologetics. Scholars are concerned for what is most likely. And what I always get when I say, hey, this is what's most likely, authenticity, not most likely. People will come back and say, but isn't it possible? If you, and what apologetics tends to do is not seek out what's most likely, but try to defend or gin up the tiniest little sliver of, hey, it's possible, because the goal is not to arrive at what's most likely. The goal is to make people who want this to be true feel validated in thinking that this is true. And so that's an apologetic thing that I try to push back against.
Okay.
Are you interested in what's most likely, or are you just interested in making yourself feel like it's still possible this is real? If the latter, that's not what scholarship is interested in. But if you're interested in what's most likely, or even what's plausible, like, it is not plausible that any of this is authentic. Is it physically possible? I mean, if we're talking about Russell's teapot levels of possible, sure, it's possible. But I am confident enough that the possibilities are so minute that I would just say it's definitely a forgery. And I think we have, I already showed that one. So in short, this is a demonstrably fake codex that David Elkington tried to get authenticated, and the attempted authentication actually falsified this. This never again saw the light of day. But Elkington did come out with things that were a slight improvement on the fake. Okay, we're not using Greek, we're going to go to Hebrew, so that the Greek person can't prove we're wrong. We're going to switch to Hebrew text. Okay, we're going to use a lot of the same imagery, but we're going to put it on different kinds of plates. We're going to age them, all that kind of stuff. And then that didn't work out. So what have we done now? Well, now let's do it all over again. Let's do it in gold. They've actually managed to work some Hebrew words into the inscriptions, even though the orientations are all wrong, the scripts are all wrong. Most of it is just utter gibberish, but they've managed to find a few words they can work in there. And now they have said, oh, there are tiny little tablets of gold that we discovered in Saudi Arabia. It would surprise me if there was no thought of Mormons in mind when they produce these. But it is another incremental improvement on their earlier work to make it sound more plausible, more genuine. So we basically went, okay, they proved that was false. We're going to come up with something new. Okay, nobody's buying that. Okay, we're going to come up with something new. And every time they've made little improvements, but every time they've managed to keep a lot of the indications that this is all coming from the same workshop. This is all coming from the same people.
Okay. And that's fascinating because, again, those lead plates were found over a decade ago or described. And I don't recall that there are any Latter-day Saint apologists or scholars that are using these as evidence for the Book of Mormon. They may be some, but this is not a mainstream Mormon apologetic. So for this, now we also have another set of plates that appear to be coming from the same workshop of what you believe are basically they are forgeries. Now, is what you believe and based on your scholarship. I want to ask you just the context of the idea of amulets in this world, which were quite tiny. They often had ciphers in them that would only been understood by certain people. So the idea of again, let's just say that this was found, these particular plates that we're talking about now were found in the right situ or in the right time and place, and then understood as being an amulet from that time period. Would this be a plausible way of looking at that within the amulet tradition?
Samuel Zinner is someone who has written on this, trying to argue that these are ciphers and codings of what's going on here. I don't buy that they are ancient examples of that, because they mix scripts from different time periods and different languages that never would have come together anciently, and they don't do them well. The characters are very clearly being written by someone who is just trying to copy an image, rather than by someone who has written these letters many times over. The amulet tradition, that is like the earliest manuscript of any kind of any text from the Bible is an amulet. 2 little silver scrolls discovered in Ketef Enom. that date to around 600 BCE, written, scratched a version of the priestly blessing from the Book of Numbers into these silver scrolls, and they were apotropaic amulets that were used to ward off evil and attract God's blessing. So absolutely, that kind of thing is real, but those texts were written by a scribal hand who knew what they were doing. It was written in a single script that was in use at the time. You would not find these items in an ancient setting, because it's mixing older and newer. It's mixing geographically disparate scripts, and it just doesn't make sense as a cipher. I don't think Zinner's case is a strong one. I think it's wishful thinking. It's trying to come up with a way to make it rational, but this doesn't line up with what we find with ancient amulets. Additionally, we saw those gold plates totally clean.
Yeah, they
You
look
you
pristine.
don't get, yeah, you cannot find something like that that has been in the earth for 2,600 years. I mean, gold does not corrode like other metals do, but still, even stuff that we discover that is golden does not look anything like those plates, which did not, nothing was out of place. Nothing was bent or broken. Nothing had corroded at all, and that's just
Okay.
not
Well,
how gold works.
let me just ask you a question. Like, let's use like Joseph Smith's amulet, his talisman. Now, you would have a biblical scholar of the 19th century or a minister who would look and say that that is uh, magical gibberish written down or something like that. And imagine an amulet tradition in ancient that maybe somebody is kind of doing a similar thing where they're kind of taking hodgepodge. Maybe they find a 200-year-old coin that has Paleo Hebrew on it. They can't read it, but they know this is a magical word, or that these are holy words. So imagine if this person has access to maybe different languages and is making an amulet in that tradition. It's not a scribe that's making it, but it's maybe more of an amateur who maybe just barely can read or write. Could it something like that look like? Could that be something that could be a plausible scenario?
Plausible, I don't think I would call that plausible, just because the materials that are being used are not the kinds of things that an amateur
Okay,
just
fair enough.
up and decides, hey, I'm going to take gold and I'm going to create these things, because they're very, very, very carefully making all this. And so that is unlikely to be something that an amateur is just going to up and do. Um, Again, we're in the realm of possibility here. So yeah, it's obviously possible, but it does not fit with what we actually find in the ground when we find these things. When we're talking about magical amulets, sure, there's a lot of repetition, but this is very clearly someone who has created dies and then is producing multiple copies of different texts using these dies. And the dies are not there to create words that, you know, a lot of this is about utterances. You just pronounce these things over and over again, or you pronounce it in slightly different ways. The way that these dies are being used, they're overlapping in a bunch of cases. They're going off the edges of pages in a bunch of cases. In some cases, they're not fully represented. Only one side of it has enough of an impression to read. The other side of it, the impression is gone. It's very clearly it's very clear that these letters are not intended for any kind of reading or pronunciation. That those letters are um, are just images that are being repeated over and over again, and they're reorienting the relationship of these different images to each other just to multiply the numbers of these plates. And why we would need dozens and dozens and dozens of plates with these variations on these collections of letters, it's just nonsensical. This is not how amulet production worked in the ancient world. It's not how magic worked in the ancient world. It doesn't make any sense as to me as anything other than people wanting to make more money by producing more things that look ancient.
Okay.
And
That's
I
fascinating.
mean, out of all the possibilities, that is by far the most likely. That these are actual ancient texts, I would put way down again, we're getting Russell's teapot levels of possibility here.
So let me just describe a scenario to you in which, let's say that we find plates that are based in the Middle East that are similar to the description that Joseph Smith gave of the golden plates. They're similar. They contain Middle Eastern scripture on them, and they roughly would correspond to being contemporaneous with the Book of Mormon. And I guess the question I have, like this scenario, would that then be something that we could look at as a lost art? That if we have a period, if we have, let's say we find plates and they roughly correspond with those that are described by Joseph Smith, and we find them and we just find one set, but that implication of that set would indicate that there was probably a lost art or tradition of producing scriptures in the Middle East. If you found something like that, because in my mind, I look at it this way: the reason why we can find Dead Sea Scrolls, well, one, it's actually a great way to be preserved, and it's in the desert, right? But the other thing is that let's just say there's this parallel of producing ancient scripture from, let's say, Lehi's time for like 1,000-year history, but it's lost to time because essentially metal plates will get melted down, especially if they don't mean anything to you for their value as metal plates.
Yeah.
Could you see that there's the potentiality that we could one day find that there was a parallel tradition of putting scripture on metal plates in the same way that Joseph Smith would have described them?
I think if you found one example of that, I think it would be an indication. Well, I think what we'd have to do is find a space for it in our current understanding of their literary conventions. And right now, that space would be, this was a showpiece created uniquely by someone wealthy in order to show off, because it wouldn't really fit with our understanding of how they engaged with texts, wouldn't really fit with our understanding of how they produced them, they mass produced them. It would be the kind of thing that, with our current understanding of their world at the time, that would only function, or most rationally function, as some kind of display piece for someone who was very wealthy, just because of how much time and effort it would take. That's just not efficient for producing texts for the sake of reading, or for the sake of reading out loud, or things like that. That's what would make the most sense. Now, if we found several of them spread around the nation of ancient Israel, pre-exilic Israel, and they shared features, like they had similar dimensions, or they opened in similar ways, or they used similar kinds of iconography as covers, or things like that, then I think we would have to significantly reorient our understanding of their literary conventions. But we would need to find multiple versions of this, I think, in order to overturn our current thinking about how they produced text and how they engaged with text, because very few people were literate, and we have quite a bit of data regarding scribal education, regarding scribal work, regarding who was employing them and for what purposes. And with the data that are available to us now, that just doesn't fit.
Well, and the reason why I want to push a little bit on this is the idea of finding anachronistic objects historically. Now, I don't remember, I should have looked it up before I did the interview with you, but we found essentially in the Mediterranean, I believe, it was either the Aegean or the Mediterranean, we found in amongst the sunken ship a sophisticated computer that was used for
The
navigation.
Antikythera mechanism.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, that's the only one we found.
Right.
But we know that if there's one, there would have had to have been a history of making these objects that would have preceded it, that could go back centuries. But yet we've only found one, and so that would be the pushback on finding these plate scenarios. Does that make sense to you?
It makes sense, apart from what we think it was used for, because we do think it was a showpiece. Because what it basically is a map of the stars and the planets, and they found a way to recreate or approximate a recreation of the paths of the stars and the planets, because the paths of the planets seemed random, arbitrary. The stars moved in set patterns, the planets were kind of arbitrary. But they managed to find a way to recreate the movement of the planets in relation to the stars, with just the turning of a crank. So it was a curiosity more than anything else. There wasn't really any practical use for this. As far as my understanding, if things have advanced in the last 10 years regarding our understanding of the utility of the Antikythera mechanism, then maybe I'm entirely wrong. But from what I understand, this was precisely a showpiece, something that somebody who was very wealthy and had access to astronomers and people who were trying to come up with ways to relate the paths of the planets to the stars, produce, probably to show off at parties or something like that. And
Well,
it
I
was
can
on a
get
ship
that.
that happened to sink.
I can understand that, but to be able to create the sophistication of the dials and all the intricacies that's going on there, that
Yeah.
means implies that there would have been an understanding of how to make something like this in the first place, that we would have had,
Yeah.
that there would have
Yeah.
been other similar objects, right?
Yeah, there would have been prototypes. There would have been one-offs of constituent elements of this thing as they were trying to build it, most likely. But it would not. It is not. I don't think anyone would agree that this is evidence that there was one of these in every home, or that these were things that were being used for scientific study, or that these were cities had them in their city centers so that people could know where the planets are going to be at any given time. Like, it doesn't seem like there's much practical use for this other than as a showpiece, or some kind of artwork of some kind,
Okay.
according to my understanding. But
Okay.
and
Well,
I
I'm
could very
glad.
well be wrong.
No, I appreciate
It's
you sharing this.
not. It is absolutely not a time machine, which
Oh,
really annoyed me about the most recent Indiana Jones movie, because they showed the thing and I was like, it's the Antikythera mechanism. And like, it's a time machine. I was like, turning this off.
Oh, that's great. I love it. Well, I wanted to, Dan, we have a few minutes left here, and I just wanted to know, was there any other final thoughts or any more slides that you want to share with the audience before we wrap this up?
I don't think I have anything else to share. I am interested in seeing this. I'm aware of the Rude Awakening channel. That gentleman has a presence on TikTok and elsewhere. I've responded to a number of his videos in the past. I'm pretty skeptical of most of his claims. I'm interested to see how this progresses, if anybody picks this up, or if this is just kind of a something that nobody would have noticed had not a bunch of Mormons suddenly become interested in it. But I think that's probably what it's going to end up being.
Well, what I think, just to kind of think, because my mom's been watching Rude Awakening for decades. Um, I live in a Christian community that Michael Rood, a lot of people watch his program, so I understand the influence that he has in certain circles. And just imagine a scenario in which you have evangelical Messianic Christians embracing ancient gold plates. Now they have to deal with the claims made about the Book of Mormon. So now you have this faith community that has to, I'm not talking about the scholarly community, I'm talking about the faith
Yeah,
community, that if they
right.
embrace these gold plates, why wouldn't they embrace the plates of the Book of Mormon?
And yeah, the temple imagery on there is and this is one of the reasons that a lot of Latter-day Saints 10 years ago were excited about the Jordan-led codices, particularly when Margaret Barker got involved, because Margaret Barker has written a lot on the Heavenly Mother and that kind of thing, and also temple symbolism and temple iconography within early Christianity. And so it depends on how they interpret it. I don't recall hearing anything. I didn't listen to the whole program, but what little I listened to, they were the Rude Awakening folks, Shabbat Night Live. They were fitting it into their evangelical reconstruction of early Christianity. So it seems that I think they would push back against Mormons trying to share this banner, hold up this exciting new discovery as evidence of, of the authenticity of the Book of Mormon. But I think it will make for interesting conversations if both of these groups continue to pursue this at some point they're going to have to get into conversation with each other, and I think it will be interesting, to say the least.
I think so too. And honestly, I think it's really important because I'm plugged into this evangelical world. I'm also plugged into the restoration. So I have this unique place. And of course, in many ways, you're plugged into multiple worlds too, this the biblical scholarly world and the Mormon world. So both of us have this really privileged place to be where we can kind of see where these things are going and get an understanding of like, well, what is the scholarly mindset? What is the believer's mindset? What is the evangelical's mindset? What is the restorationist mindset? And look at them through those various types of prisms. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's like whether these plates are real or not, but if they are accepted by some segments of evangelicalism, it then opens up another place that the restoration and evangelicals can have conversations. And that to me, I kind of want that because even if these
Mm-hmm.
aren't real, I want people talking to each other because we live in such a society that's so broken down and we're all in our warring camps. And so in one sense, even if these are not real, if it brings people together to talk to each other, I can really see some value on a humanitarian level to get people who are believers, fellow believers, to actually start talking to each other. So in one sense, I think it could lead to something good. Is that what do you think about that?
I think that would be wonderful if there was a time when I forget who published How Wide the Divide, but there was an attempt on the part of evangelicals and Latter-day Saints to try to tear down this wall and find areas where there were points of contact, where there was agreement. And I think some people dug in their heels against that. And these days, I see an awful lot of evangelicals on social media who immediately object to any attempt to try to find common ground with Latter-day Saints. And so I think it's a messy battleground, but I think you're right. We're in our different warring camps, and if this can be some glue that binds us, then that would be wonderful. I But yeah, I'm going to push the the critical scholarly perspective of not of trying to combat the spread of misinformation. And for me, these are forgeries. Fundamentally, this is misinformation. This is disinformation. So I don't know the degree to which it would be helpful as kind of a relic that is not authentic, but at least a centerpiece for a discussion for folks to come together across those divides. I would welcome that if it can become that, though. But
Yeah.
I don't know how it would become that if everybody agrees that these are not authentic.
Right. So I want to thank you so much, Dan. And that's the thing, this whole there's those people who did like oh, I don't want to get the wrong name. His last name's Johnson and Richard Mao and other evangelical leaders who a couple decades ago were starting to make these forays. They were the
Mhm.
trailblazers for me, Jeff McCullough of Hello Saints, David Boyce of 52 Churches in 52 Weeks, Dr. Kyle Bashirs, who's doing a lot of great Mormon scholarship and is a Baptist trained minister.
Mhm.
And then other evangelical pastors that are friends of mine in Utah that are also having different types of conversations with the restoration. So there was a pushback, but now there's this whole new movement that just basically started right about the time that I started my channel of evangelicals who want to have a different conversation with the restoration. And I don't think it's coincidental that it happens almost on a very important during this period of time as a many 200-year anniversary dates for the restoration. And almost from the very beginning, the evangelicals have been at war with the restoration. And I tell people in many ways, Mormonism got its start when that Presbyterian minister went to the Smith family and said that Alvin is burning in hell because he didn't get the Presbyterian baptism. And that caused Joseph Smith to go on a journey to find, in his own wonderful way, find a way to get Alvin into heaven. And so I really feel like it was the bad teaching of an evangelical pastor that really caused the Smith family to be seekers to find a way to get Alvin into heaven. And I think we need to look at it from that perspective as well.
I think that's a much more constructive perspective, and the attempt to draw lines of division, I think, is an important part of the identity politics of a lot of conservative Christians these days, as well as Latter-day Saints. I get drawn out of the circle of Latter-day Saints quite frequently these days, just because I have this compartment where I engage in critical scholarship. So yeah, I think the what's the old saying? You drew a line to keep me out, but love drew a line to bring me in, or something like that. I
Amen.
forget what it is, but something I have written in the first set of scriptures that I ever got. I think that's absolutely a better way to look at all of this.
You know,
We
and
overcome.
I want to let you know, Dan, that the largest segment of my audience are faithful Mormons. And I tell people, I say, listen, um, they criticize you a lot, and I've stood up for you.
I
Um,
appreciate that.
and because one, I consider you a friend, and I think you are a person who you do believe in God. And I think it's really important that people put all these labels on you, just like there's evangelical apologists who are doing the same to me. And I think it's really important that you look at Dan as I do, as a fellow image bearer, believers. He's a fellow image bearer, and he's due all the respect being a fellow image bearer that you should accord him. And don't demonize him, don't attack him. Reach out, have conversations with him. But I think it's really important that we all be civil. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of progressives and people on the left that are not civil as well. This is a two-way street here. I think and many of us, we're all responsible in many ways for the mess
Yeah.
this country's in. So, Dan, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program today. You're a really awesome human being. And I was just wondering if you had any final words you'd like to say.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I appreciate the invitation, and I look forward to seeing where this discussion goes. But other than that, yeah, keep up the good work. I appreciate it very much, and I know there are a lot of other people out there who appreciate it as well.
So Dan McClellan of Data Over Dogma, check out his channel, his podcast YouTube channel. It's really exploded. There's going to be links in the description to those of you who'd like to financially support the channel. MormonBookReviews.com. We have our merch store. We also have people who can support us on PayPal, Patreon, and Venmo. And I want to thank all of you. Could not do it without you. And remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.